This is Perspectivas Latinas, a community service of CAN TV. I'm your host, Juan Carlos Hernandez. A good story can stay with you whether it is in print, online, or in a film. It may also have the potential to make you think differently and maybe even change your life. Today we have Robert Renteria, who will talk to us about his story and his foundation. Joining him is Robert Torres, a member of his team. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start off by talking about you and your background, Mr. Torres, please.
Yeah, my name is Robert Torres, president of AccuQuest Drug Test, and a member of the Barrio Foundation for about 4 years now. Been implementing this book, life-changing book.
Really?
Yes.
So where are you from originally?
Originally, grew up around the Humboldt Park area. That's where I was raised around, and reading the book really impacted my life. Growing up in the neighborhood, seeing firsthand what drugs and violence do to you was a no-brainer. Once I picked up this book and I read it, knew that we had to implement this book in our company as well. So,
awesome. Mr. Renteria, tell us about where you came from, and obviously we're going to get in very deep with your story. But what you're up to now, where you're from?
I grew up in the barrio of East LA, and fast forward, and I moved here in 1990.
1990.
After serving 7 years in the Armed Forces, 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg, with $200 in a duffel bag, and I got a job in the commercial laundry industry. In fact, in Chicago, I was the guy responsible for building all the spin cycle laundromats and bubble end laundromats.
Oh, really?
But after 6 years of working hard and dedicating my life, I became vice president of a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange. And I opened up my own business, and about 7, 8 years ago, I was inspired to write my first book, and here we are today.
Well, okay, so what inspired you to write this book? What day did you decide, I need to sit down? Tell us about that day, because I'm sure there was one day where you can point to and say, I need to write this book. I need to tell my story.
There was a young Latino gentleman, about 21, 22 years old. I pulled up in front of a local restaurant almost 7 years ago, and he stopped me and he says, hey man, your car's fat. And I kind of laughed because I still think I'm pretty cool, but I have to ask him, what do you mean fat? and he says, it's cool, how do I get one? So I said, come on, let's go inside and let's talk. So after about a half an hour, he said, so Robert, what's your secret? So I said, get a napkin and a pen. I want you to write down 2 words. The first word I want you to write down is hard, and the second word is work. And he looked at the napkin, he says, Robert, really hard work, that's the secret? I said, that's the secret. Now he looked a little bit confused, but he put the napkin in his pocket, he reached out, he shook my hand, he ran out the door like I gave him gold. And I saw him get in the car and drive away. I said, there's a story here, right? We have money for wars and we can't feed the poor. We have children, teenagers, adults like walking around lost in a culture of darkness. I said, I want to do something about it. I want to write a book. And this book is to be used as a roadmap to help their kids avoid the detours we took in our lives, to help inspire and motivate them to make better life choices. And that's what inspired me to write the book.
So it was that one day. Did you keep in touch with this young man?
You know what? I've never seen the kid since, or the young man since, and people tell me it was an angel.
You never know.
Yeah, absolutely.
You never know. And how did you discover this book?
Well, I found Robert on Facebook, and I saw the book, and I remember at that point in time I was doing a lot of traveling, and he stated that they were in the Hudson's newsstands. So I reached out to Robert and says, hey Robert, how do I get a hold of your book? Now I had been following him on Facebook, so and read briefly about the book, and I really wanted to get the book, and sure enough reached out to him, and Robert was kind enough to say, next time when you fly back into Chicago, we'll meet up and I'll give you a book. And that's how I got a hold of the book.
So, but earlier you were talking about you being on a plane and reading it or wanting to share it with somebody that was sitting next to you.
That is correct. I remember reading the book, and once again, his story is a lot of our story, and it's part of my story. And I remember in the book where Robert was speaking about his mother, and it really touched my heart. As well as being Latino, our parents are very close to our heart. And I remember finished reading the book, and I was just so excited. And so I started speaking to the guy next to me. He's like, you got to read this book. This book is phenomenal. It's great. It's life-changing. And all I could do, I couldn't stop thinking about the book. Once again, the difference between Robert and many others is that he told his story. And as a Latino, we don't tell our story. And that was very inspiring to me.
Oh, wow. And how did this person on the plane react?
Well, he was kind of caught off guard. Here was this guy sitting to the right of him,
Right.
and wondering what the book was all about. And I, basically told him about what the book is and whatnot. And so he was also all ears to hear about the book as well. So, but he got excited with me.
That's awesome. He mentioned your mother. He mentioned that as Latinos and Latinas, for our mujeres, we don't always tell our stories. Tell us about your stories, your story, and your mother, and that struggle and that difficulty that you came through, and you're sharing with us through this book.
Well, as I mentioned, I grew up in the Barrio of East LA, and my mother and my father were factory laborers. They made $1.25 an hour. And,
Wow.
and my mother got married. She didn't know my father was doing drugs because she was in love with his good looks and his smooth-talking ways. My dad was in and out of jail. He was a heroin addict. He liked the drugs more than he liked his family. And at the age of 3, he abandoned our family, and the only legacy he left us was a pile of bills and a bunch of empty bottles of booze in the trash can. But my mother, she was strong. She persevered. She kept us together as a familia, working 2-3 jobs to make sure her little boy and her little girl, Hermijita, my sister, did not become part of a system. And she taught us that the most important thing in life was family, that you protect it and respect it and you don't abuse the privilege. I was, fast forward, I'm 6 years old now, and I was in a terrible accident. I was hit by a carnival ride. And I was put into the hospital, and they told my mother that I was either going to die or be a vegetable.
Wow.
Ultimately landed up in a school for the physically disabled and mentally challenged, because I had to learn how to walk and talk and read and write again. And after 3 years of rehabilitation and my mother pushing me beyond human endurance, I remember walking out of that school tall and strong and on my own, which so eloquently proved to me that day that happiness was not about pleasure, but happiness was about victory, because we had done what they said could not be done. And for me, that represents ganas, corazón, suerte. It means Latino, because we don't give up. So now I'm 9, and my mother remarries, and she introduces me to my stepfather, who was a hardworking guy, but he was an abusive drunk. And he used to beat on me till I was black and blue. And I was just a little kid. Back in the day, he didn't say anything, right? And, my message for a lot of people is that, there's no excuse for violence. You don't put your hands on people.
Right.
And you especially don't put your hands on women, because women are not only beautiful and smart, right?
Right.
But they're the greatest gift that God ever created in this lifetime.
Right.
So now, when I was old enough, I ran away, and I started running and gunning, stealing and dealing, doing drugs, selling drugs.
All in LA?
Yeah. And then I started running with gangs, looking for love at all the wrong places. And I'm here to tell kids, in particular in Chicago, that gang banging and violence is not a lifestyle, but a death style. 17 years old, my father dies in a halfway house on Skid Row. He was a hobo. He died a bum. And I went to the halfway house to see him because I didn't know who he was. And as I'm walking through the hallway of the flickering lights, it was stale smelling. There was prostitutes and pimps and derelicts and alcoholics reaching out to me, asking me for money. And when I got to the door, I was shaking. I opened the door real slow, and it was like deja vu, because he left me again the same way he left me when I was only 3 years old. More bottles of booze in the trash can. So I tell people, a lot of people think you can control drugs and control alcohol, but they'll always, no matter what, and Robert knows, take control of you. So my father's death proved to me that if you play with the devil, you're going to get burned. So after spending a couple years like a dog chasing his tail in circles, my abuelita, my grandfather, sat me down and said, you got to get out of here. If you don't, you'll end up dead or in prison, or best case, some dead in factory job. So I went back and got my GED, and I joined the military. And that move not only changed my life, but it saved my life. And it not only made me a man, but it made me a better man. And I got a chance to travel all over the world. And in fact, one thing it gave me was a word called character. It taught me that character is not just doing what's right when somebody's watching, but doing the right thing when nobody's watching.
Right.
So after 7 years of honorably serving our country, I decided it was time to get out. And I was ready to be a leader and a man. And I went back to LA, and my grandfather was right. Those same guys I was running around with had now elevated their game to dealing heavy drugs. Some of them got dusted and smoked in gang violence and drug violence. Others were doing hard time in a federal penitentiary. So I decided to come to Chicago in 1990 with $200 in a duffel bag.
Why Chicago? I'm curious.
I
Why do the cold?
Yeah, I met a guy in the military, and he said, if you ever want to come visit or get away, so I wanted to get out of LA. So that's how I got to Chicago. And he had a 1-bedroom bachelor apartment in Lyle out by Naperville. So I slept on his floor in the living room, made a little blanket for myself with pillows, and all I could afford back then was Arby's 5 for $5. You know, I had half a sandwich in the morning, half at night, drank a lot of water, lost a lot of weight, but I said, you know, I'm going to be somebody. And I got a job in the commercial laundry industry building laundromats. And after 6 years of working hard every day, every holiday, every weekend, they never saw me coming. I became vice president of a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange.
Wow.
So I climbed that ladder of corporate America for 6 years and decided it was time for me to take a shot. I'm not talking about a shot of tequila either. I'm talking about a shot of opening my own business. In 2001, I opened my own company. And after 3 years, we became the #1 distribution company in the United States. And I thought I had everything I ever wanted, Juan Carlos. You know, I had a house and car and clothes. And I share that with you not to impress you, but to empower you. Because the two greatest days in your life are the day you're born and the day you realize why you're born. And that's when I became an author.
You became an author. And obviously, he touched you, Mr. Torres. You said you identified, you saw the excitement of reading this book came from the seeing yourself in there. Tell us about some of the struggles you saw, and you said you followed him on Facebook. But what led you to look for him on Facebook? Tell us first about your life, and then how eventually connected to Mr. Renterias.
Absolutely. You know, seeing what he was posting on Facebook, first and foremost, being Latino, it was odd to see somebody open up and speak about his life. It is not common as a Latino. That, number one, inspired me. That really caught my attention. Because I own a drug testing company, I also know a lot of the facts. And reading his book and growing up in Humboldt Park area, I remember numerous times walking in at home and seeing my mother on her knees, and Mama, what's wrong? You know, I heard some gunshots, hearing the violence, hearing the sirens, hanging around with gangs and drug dealers. You know, firsthand, I saw what it did to you, and I just knew that I had to reach out and get this book, and not only after I read the book, but I knew I had to implement this book. And after I started getting involved, and I personally started buying the books, and I was giving them out at health fairs, and seeing the reaction of parents as I gave them the books. Parents are looking for a solution. And so this book has really inspired me based on my background, what I've gone through, and a blessing in my life where I'm at today in knowing Robert.
So you arrived to this moment in your life. You've struggled, you've worked hard, you've earned, and in many ways I think you would agree you were blessed by some opportunities, and you decide to sit down. You meet this young man, this angel, as somebody said. Some people have told you. You sit down and write. Tell us about the process of telling your story, of putting it down on paper, how that was, and how you went to the editing process and eventually to publication.
Well, I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version because it's a long process. But, you know, I thought I was going to be able to write the book in 3 months and be done. But it took me about 1.5 years to finish the book. And I understand you're writing a book, so you understand the process. But when I got done, I really thought that I was done. Okay, I was going to write a book, put it on the internet, have bragging rights, tell all my friends, and go back to work. And then I got a call from Chicago Public Schools. Arnie Duncan was still Secretary of Education in 2008. And they sat down with me with their board, and they wanted to teach the book in schools. So a curriculum was created for the book that meets the Illinois State Learning Standards, which I paid for, I own, and I gift to any school around the country. I give away the curriculum. And then the following year, I was told that the kids are reading the book to their parents. I said, well, don't your parents read? They said they don't read English. So we translated the book into Spanish. Then I set up From the Barrio Foundation, a 501c3 non-for-profit, which addressed a lot of youth issues. Then watching the book in middle schools, high schools, colleges, higher education, youth prisons, jails, social services. I wasn't getting to the elementary schools because the book From the Barrio to the Boardroom it's raw, but it's real, and it's used more or less for 7th grade and all the way to adults. I said, well, what if I had a tool that can cut the umbilical cord to all the gang recruitment that happens in our schools because the kids become runners. So I had this idea, and I shared it with my publisher, so we released a graphic novel bringing the book to life called Mi Barrio.
Would you just hold that up for the camera too, please?
And Mi Barrio, excuse me, I'm proud to say, in 2012, was voted the best graphic novel in Latin America, Spain, and the United States of America for addressing youth issues. It was the book.
Wow.
So now, in working with kids, say 4th grade to adults, I wanted to round off the program. So I had run out of money, but I had the foundation, so I pitched the idea to the Boeing company. And the Boeing company funded this book here called Little Barrio. It's an activity coloring book. So in the last 6 years, I'm proud to say, since they were released, that we've created a bilingual, comprehensive, right, non-generic program that resonates with the youth and promotes student achievement. It bridges the educational gap and it helps our kids with the critical thinking skills. So it's a comprehensive bilingual program that's also digital. And by the way, there's also a faith-based curriculum that was created by churches because they said, I see your book in the hood with our kids, but I can't get the kids into church. So they created a faith-based curriculum. So now we have a faith-based and a school-based curriculum that we donate to classrooms across America and into many communities around the world.
So you have this faith-based, you have the school, but I also looking through your website, I saw that you have something for people that are going through recovery, correct?
Well, the book is used in it's used for preventive and intervention programs, so it's used on both sides of the fence. So my goal is to use it not just from the outside in, but from the inside out, and helping with the recidivism that's happening. A couple of years ago was that 500,000 people got out of jail and 360,000 people went back. So that's a problem. That's another issue that we're dealing with. So it's not just the kids in school, but it's also the people who are in prison when they get out that we want to keep them out.
Right, definitely. Would you please read a part of your book, a segment, just to share with our audience so we can get a taste of
Sure.
some of your written story? You're sharing a lot of your story already, but we would like to hear
Sure.
some of it.
I'll share with you a couple paragraphs from the book that'll help me drive a point that I want to make here of why the book is very important. In the early 1960s, only 4% of Latinos graduated high school and only 2% went on to college. But today, education for the Latino, the Hispanic American, in all ethnicities is becoming a great equalizer that cuts across gender, color, religion, and national origin. The memories of welfare, drugs, discrimination, crime, alcohol, unemployment and underemployment, gangs, violence, and all other obstacles, or perceived obstacles, are now being challenged by Hispanics all around the world. All races who were once poor are building great successes and accomplishments globally, and it's obviously made a long overdue decision to come together and take the lead to draw from our roots to break through the barriers that have tried to boycott us from economic power. We must truly believe, and I'm going to say that again, we must truly believe in ourselves regardless of our background, economic position, language, the length of our hair, the color of our skin, or gender.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, we'll get back to, we've been talking to you a lot. Now, you said you made this part of your work, this book, and distributing it, sharing it. What are some of the responses, what some of the words that people have shared with you after reading this book, after you guys may be talking about and engaging in a conversation?
Sure. Here, I'll give you a last testimony that 2 weeks ago, a mother that had lost her son due to violence in Chicago, about a month and a half ago, I had given her some books, and she had reached out to me on Facebook. And I had given her the book, and I had given her a couple of books, and she gave one of the books to a kid that was in gangs. She contacted me about a week ago, and she says, Robert, you know, I gave this book to a young man that's in gangs, and the kid said, you know, I'm looking for love. And the mother said, I'll love you. And she says, I want you to read this book. And he came back to her and told her that he is no longer in gangs. Wow. He had gave his life to Christ. And I believe that this book was a roadmap in his life. And there's testimonies like that you hear all the time that really impact your life. When you see that kids are using this book and keeping this book because they can relate to this book. Every time they turn on the TV, the radio, they're constantly hearing it. So it's no longer something we can hide from our children. So by having this book as a program, as a roadmap, I think kids, as we're hearing in the testimonials that I'm getting, is that they're holding on to these books, and that's impacting.
Definitely. Now, you said that, and I think it's true, and it's true so much more now, and I think in our generation and in previous generations, is that young people are just being consistently slammed with negative news, bad information, or not necessarily just bad information, but one of the realities, I guess, of violence, death, and drugs. Mr. Renteria, you've spoken and you've worked with youth in schools, but you've also worked outside of schools, and you touched on that just a bit earlier. Tell us about your experiences of going to youth prisons and working with different populations.
Well, it was quite a process. I mean, what started off working with schools has evolved into even in the corporate sector. Like I was at Detroit, Michigan last week giving a keynote at General Motors. Or the week before that, I was at the Boeing company discussing how to navigate through corporate America with no glass ceiling. So, but I have spoken at women's prisons, Dwight Correctional Facility as an example, talking to 1,140 women doing 25 years to life. Then speaking at a youth prison, say in St. Charles, and talking to kids like Robert said who are looking for love, but in all the wrong places.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, my whole message, as I mentioned before, is to teach our kids that gang banging and violence is not a lifestyle, but a death style. And that the secrets to success are hard work, determination, and education. So where I have been speaking, it's all over the gambit. It's more of an anomaly or an enigma. It's rare, but it's real. And it's capturing the hearts of people from all over the world, because it's not, you know, truth be told, you know, if I have a confession to make today, you know, this book has my name on it, Robert Renteria, but it's not even my story. It's our story. It's a story of a lot of people who worked hard and made a lot of sacrifices and have done whatever we have to do legally, mind you, to come out clean on the other side. It's a story of hope and dreams, y ganas and concito, you know, yes, you can if you believe. So it's a story of hope and a story of dreams. And which explains why the Bible, as an example, is the #1 best-selling book on the planet, because it gives people hope, a God to believe. And so if these kids see themselves in the book, because they're living the life today that we lived back then, and it becomes their story, then we need to put these books in the hands of as many kids as possible. And exchange these books, mind you, for all the guns, knives, drugs, needles, booze, and cigarettes, which is my personal goal.
All right. So, I'm curious though about your experience with the women in that prison. How was that, and what kind of response did you get from them? And
that's a great question. You know, what happened was when I went there, they stood up and they said, "Why do you care? Why are you here?"
They asked you that point blank.
Right. And I said, "I'm here because I need your help." And they said, "How can we help you? We're in prison." And I said, "Show of hands, who here has kids?" And they all raised their hands. I said, "Who wants their kids to end up here?" And they all put their hands down. And he started to cry. I said, "I need to make phone calls. I need to write home. And I need you to help me put these books in the hands of kids so they don't end up here." And the place just went nuts. Everybody was bawling.
Really? And what did these women share with you? I mean, after this, it becomes a dialogue, doesn't it?
Well, you know, like I said, people are looking for shortcuts in life, almost as if you could put powder in a glass and stir it up and have a pocket full of dough. Life doesn't work that way. There's no shortcuts. And a lot of these women talked about they're trying to make some quick money, so they're selling drugs or they're robbing houses, or you know, they got involved in violence with gangs. But that's all a dead end. So we talked about, you know, following the steps, the roadmap, like Robert said, to the book, and not to be trying to take shortcuts.
And when you go talk to youth in the prisons, how have they responded?
I'll give you an example. St. Charles Youth Prison, a few years ago, they took maybe about 300 books. They have something like 1,800 kids that go through their year, young adults under the age of 21. And they did a shakedown recently over there for contraband, and they found the Barrio books underneath their mattresses. So they were using the book, stealing the book out of the libraries, and then hiding it inside their cells.
Really?
Really.
Wow. These are all amazing stories, but when did you realize, maybe it was after a few days or a few weeks that this book was out, but when was the moment you realized, wow, this is something bigger, much bigger than just my story, as you've said, and I have to do more with this and make, like you said, you've created a foundation around your story, and not just, like you said, not just my story, but our story.
I think early on when I got calls from principals and teachers telling me, "Hey, Robert, I got a problem with your book."
Oh, that's right.
And I said, "What's the problem?" And they said the kids broke into the classroom and stole the book. So I knew I was onto something.
Right.
So I decided to do was to follow it and to build it. And I'll give you an example. We talk about the bigger picture, is that the first 5 years we did a blanket on the city of Aurora in every school, program, church, the police, after school program, battered women's shelters, homeless shelters. Everybody got from the barrio to the boardroom in the entire city. And for the first time in the history of that city, after 5 years, there were no murders in the city of Aurora.
Wow.
So my goal now is to take that blueprint and to talk to McCarthy here and talk to Mayor Emanuel and to say that we have a blueprint as a solution to help stop this violence.
Okay. Now, obviously that's one of the problems we face in our city, and not just our city, but I think across the country. Unfortunately, we have the most murders from, if I remember the news correctly, now in the country. What is your hope for your foundation? How do you see it growing and changing? Certainly that's the blueprint, but what else are you envisioning 2 years out, 5 years out?
Well, the goal for the foundation for right now is to use the books From the Barrio to the Boredom, Mi Barrio, and Little Barrio, along with the school-based and faith-based curriculum to help to change the landscape for our youth across America and around the world, and to create other tools to reach other kids. There's a new book coming out in January called El Barrio, which is a superhero. We're working on a reality TV show called Second Chances. I'm working with a producer in the Aurora area who's working with the Grammys, so we can go mainstream and help this on a global scale to reach kids around the world. So it's creating partnerships and going forward in collaboration with other groups like Robert and his company with AccuQuest Drug Test, who's out there helping kids as well and saving lives. So together we build our own coalition, and we go out there and literally, like Cesar Chavez said, if you want to remember me, you organize. And that's what we're doing, we're organizing.
Definitely. Now, this question is for both of you. We'll start with you, Mr. Torres. What do you think is the single greatest challenge facing young Latinos, and besides the violence, and how can we as a community help our young Latinos move forward? Very briefly, we're running out of time.
Yeah.
It's a big question.
I think the key thing is education.
Education.
Education is crucial. Helping our kids, educating our youth and parents about the drugs and violence issue that we're having.
Okay. Mr. Renteria.
I would say that education is the greatest weapon which you can use to change the world. And that's what I'd like to use these books to help to change the world. And you can get more information, by the way, on my website at www.fromthebarrio.com to learn more.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This conversation can obviously go on for a couple of hours or even more. And I hope to have you back someday.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Perspectivas Latinas is a community service of CAN TV. If your nonprofit organization would like to use CAN TV, call 312-738-1400 and ask for nonprofit services. Tune into Perspectivas Latinas for local issues and concerns every Thursday at 8:30 p.m. on CAN TV 21. I'm Juan Carlos Hernandez. Thank you for joining us.